Welcome to the 63rd episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit podcast. I am your host, Mark Hasara, and for over 24 years, I flew the KC-135 Stratotanker, going all over the world, passing gas for a living. I'm a veteran of 4 wars: Desert Storm, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Enduring Freedom, and Iraqi Freedom, the Shakhanah campaign. I was also the deputy commander of the initial cadre that created the 509th Weapons School, the KC-135 Weapons School, that's part of the United States Air Force Weapons School at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, Nevada. On the Lesson from the Cockpit show, we talk about some of the most extreme and extraordinary military, commercial, and even general aviation events that happened around the world. Our purpose is to hear the stories, but more importantly, what are the lessons learned from these intense and phenomenal military flying feats from all over the world? Our purpose of the show is to give our listeners a greater understanding of how does the aviation world work, but more importantly, increase critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. Many of these stories you're hearing for the very first time on the Lessons from the Cockpit show. Our show is supported financially by Wall Pilot, aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These are very detailed side profiles of all kinds of different airplanes. We have 129 ready to print that you can see on our wallpilot.com website, or we can do a custom order for you too, with your name, tail number, unit, and even the standard conventional load you want on an aircraft. So go by wallpilot.com and order 2 or 3 of these 4, 6, and 8 foot prints on vinyl that you can peel off and stick to any flat surface. We've been doing a lot of unit emblems lately, and we had one guy put one on his boat. It hasn't faded yet, nor has it come off. Today I want to give you some of the background of an event that happened 100 years ago, June 27th. What does an oil rigger, a DeHavilland biplane, and Coronado Island have in common? Well, today you're going to learn what that is. So, grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit show and talk about this 100-year anniversary. John was a curious kid, and he loved tinkering with things. Born in 1891 in Virginia to German immigrant parents, his father, a local doctor, taught him to be curious and also taught him to read. And he read a lot of books. But John knew what he wanted to do. Because he loved tinkering with things, I'm going to become a mechanical engineer. And right at the turn of the century, he went to Virginia Polytechnical Institute and got an engineering degree, mechanical engineering degree. Now, what do you do with a mechanical engineering degree once you have it? The railroads wanted people like crazy to come work for them, and John figured, well, why not? So he became a locomotive test engineer and became very familiar with piping, tubing, valves, gauges, which later on in his life was going to be very instrumental. Locomotives have been around for a while, but there was a new form of transportation just on the horizon. And John was just mesmerized when he read about the Wright brothers and their December 1903 flight at Kill Devil Hill. Most of the America didn't care about it. Matter of fact, mainstream media at the time didn't even cover it. It wasn't until about 5 years later in 1908 when the Wright brothers went to France that they really became worldwide figures with their Wright Flyer. And you talk about the need for people with mechanical engineering degrees. Obviously, these new airplanes needed that kind of skill set. But the Army needed his skill set also. In May of 1917, he enlists in the aviation section of the Signal Enlisted Reserve and becomes a lieutenant in November of that same year. World War I is raging at this time period, and he gets trained to be a pilot, and he's flying the French Spad fighter, which is an incredible fighter plane for that time period. John is assigned to one of the flying units that participates in the San Mijail offensive in the middle of September of 1918. And he's a Spad fighter pilot that is flying with 1,481 other airplanes in the coalition at that time under General Pershing. And he writes that there's a problem that the forces really have where flying is concerned. He complains his SPAD could only stay up for 20 to 40 minutes in combat. He had to fly 9 separate sorties on the opening day of the San Mijail offensive because there was no way to get gas in the air. He says, we all wish we could refuel somehow in the air without having to return to our bases. Just when the action was getting interesting, he says. And there was another SPAD pilot who said the same thing. His name was Lowell. The air campaign over San Mijail was probably a watershed event for the Army Air Service, as it was called at the time, and the use of air power in a campaign. And remember what I told you, there's a 3-legged stool that air power stands on. The first one is joint integrated fires. The second one is persistent intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. All of these planes would have to land after 20 to 40 minutes because there was no way to get fuel. They had to land to refuel and, of course, rearm too. And this always stuck with John, even after the war, as he began looking at, is there better ways to fight an air campaign? John and his wife end up in the early 1920s at Rockwell Field on the island of Coronado near San Diego. And the way Coronado Island was segregated during that time period was the Army Air Service had one side and the Navy had the other. Major Henry Hap Arnold is like the wing king at Rockwell Field. He's the base commander. And who shows up at the same time but his old flying buddy Lowell? And of course, they get to talking with the boss and they're going, boss, we got to figure out a way airplanes don't have to land to get gas. John, being an engineer, he has this engineering process in his head. He comes up with what he thinks is a great way to refuel in the air from one plane to another. He and Lowell go into the boss, go in and see the old man and say, Major Arnold, I think we've got a way to do this, but I'm going to have to work out some engineering plans and we're going to have to retrofit some airplanes, but I think I've got a good idea on how to do this. And Hap Arnold says, okay, go down to the maintenance area, have them wall off an area to you, and why don't you come up with some way to do this? John does it. Going in there, obviously, going to the maintenance hangar, John goes, okay, how are we going to tackle this problem? And he comes up with a fairly good idea, but now he's got to come up with the resources to do it. But remember, he's a mechanical engineer and had been a locomotive test engineer with pipes, gauges, valves, and so forth. And he designs a system that will go in the bottom of an Airco DH-4. Now, these are DeHavilland biplanes made in the United States. And at that time period, they're like the frontline airplane in the Air Service. And John goes to work refurbing one of these DH-4s into a refueling tanker. The problem he has is, how do I pass the gas from the tanker DH-4 to the receiver DH-4? One day, the idea comes to him when he sees a fire hose. And he says, if I could put like a regular gasoline refueling valve on the end of this thing, batten it down so it doesn't leak, and we can dangle that fire hose underneath the airplane, I think that's a good way to transfer the gas. Now, they put a 50-gallon gas tank in the tanker hooked up to this fire hose refueling system. They test it, and they actually stay connected for 40 minutes, which is a long time, but they don't pass any gas. They're just trying to find out. He's working the engineering process through his head. He's just trying to find out, will this in fact work? And later on, they have tests where they do in fact transfer a little bit of fuel. But now the time has come, and Hap Arnold's saying, okay, let's get this done, boys. Early in the morning of January 27, 1923, First Lieutenant Virgil Hine and First Lieutenant Frank Siefert take off in the DH-4 tanker that is equipped with First Lieutenant John Paul Richter and his refueling system, his dangling hose. Moments later, Captain Lowell Smith, his buddy from the San Miguel offensive, and John P. Richter take off in the receiver aircraft, and they go up over Rockwell Field, flying at 500 feet, just doing a racetrack over the Coronado Island, and they stay up for 6 hours and 38 minutes. They have one refueling contact, and they pass about 75 gallons of gas. They set the record for flight endurance with this 6 hour and 38 minute flight. As with all things and all records, they're meant to be broken. So the next day, Hines and Siefert and Smith and John Richter take off once again over Coronado Island. And they're going to try and break a record that was made by McCready and Kelly in October of 1922. They have a problem, though. The receiver aircraft gasoline valve becomes plugged, and they can't take on gas. They're trying to fix it, and they're trying to do everything they can to stay up. Smith and Richter are really lucky, because as the wheels hit the mud, the airplane flips over on its back, and it breaks the propeller in the mud. So now they have to go back and reconfigure another airplane. They fix up the airplane, but they make two tankers now, because now they're going to see what is the practical application of air refueling. And so they get two airplane tankers configured as tankers. And on August 27th and 28th, they're just trying to find out, okay, how long can we stay up? Well, they have two tanker airplanes to try this with now. Virgil Hine and Frank Siefert are flying one of these tankers, and I can't remember who's flying the other one. Darn it, I have to look it up. But they take off in the morning, and they just keep flying. And they make 16 air refueling contacts, and they stay up for 37 hours and 15 minutes just flying over the top of Rockwell Field. Major Hap Arnold wants a more realistic scenario to find out, okay, what can air refueling really do for us? So on October 25th of the same year, again, Lowell Smith and John P. Richter take off from Sumas, Washington, which is almost right on the Canadian border, and head south. During the flight, they set 16 new world records for distance, speed, and duration. They fly a distance of 1,250 miles, being refueled 3 times while in the air. So now they know the theory of extending range of an airplane by mid-air refueling is now a demonstrated fact. Well, here we are 100 years later. June 27th of 2023, Air Mobility Command does an operation they call Centennial Contact. And on that day, we had tanker aircraft that were refueling receivers over all 50 states, according to the press release, even in Hawaii. You have to remember, the Hawaii Air National Guard flies KC-135 R models. Now, I got a lot of texts about this. I was up in the mountains off grid when this happened. It was our yearly Hill family, my wife's family reunion that they do at Moon Lake, and it's totally off grid. So I didn't find out about this until we came down out of the mountains on Friday. But across all 50 states during Operation Centennial Contact, Air Mobility Command commemorated the very first air refueling on the 27th of June, 1923, with Captain Lowell Smith and First Lieutenant John Richter in a DH-4 biplane getting gas and staying up for over 6 hours. During my research, I found something fascinating. John P. Richter dies at the age of 73, and he's buried in an unusual place. He's from Virginia, but he's buried in the Gettysburg National Cemetery. And I thought you couldn't be buried at the Gettysburg National Cemetery unless you are either part of that battle or from that area. Somehow, John Paul Richter's family got permission to bury him in the Gettysburg battlefield. I think he died in 1965 at the age of 73. I don't know what caused his death, old age probably. Captain Lowell Smith wasn't so lucky. He was a colonel in the Army Air Corps during World War II. And right after the war ended, he was the Davis-Monthan base commander. And he loved horses. And in November of 1945, he was riding a horse and fell off. And it killed him. And he's buried in Arlington Cemetery. What a strange way for a warrior and a pilot to die. But, back then, that was one of the things everybody loved to do. Remember, Chuck Yeager broke his ribs the night before he was supposed to go fly the X-1 and go supersonic. So horseback riding is a lot of fun, but also can be dangerous. Many of you probably saw on Tuesday, June 27th, a week and a half ago, all of these tankers flying with fighters. And we're probably wondering, hey, what's going on? This is pretty cool. Well, now you know. Operation Centennial Contact. 100 years from the first air refueling over Rockwell Field on Coronado Island near San Diego. And that's what this oil and gas man, this locomotive technician, Rockwell Field and Coronado Island had in common. This guy, John P. Richter, this mechanical engineer, was able to figure out how to transfer gas in 1923 to another airplane. And he created a system that would allow them, using a fire hose, to transfer gas into other airplanes. Now, this same system was used in 1929 when the question mark flew again over Southern California. They chose Southern California because of the weather. And then Major Carl Spaatz was flying in Fokker triplane, and they stayed up from Monday morning flying on New Year's Day, refueling over the Rose Bowl because they knew everybody would be there watching the game. So you can imagine, here you are watching Georgia Tech, and I can't remember who else was playing, and all of a sudden these two airplanes fly overhead and they're connected from this hose, but they fly for 150 hours. They have to land on Friday because one engine is quit and one of them is spitting, and the only good engine, they figure we better get this airplane down on the ground. Years later, when General Carl Spaatz becomes the first chief of staff of the brand new Air Force, he assigns Alpha 1 priority to air refueling. And he understands air refueling because he was inside the question mark. And he realizes, hey, air refueling is going to be important. He wrote after the question mark landed, Major General Fichette, who was the Air Service commander at the time, said, okay, what do you think? Write a report about this and where you think this is going, which Carl Spaatz did. And it's very fascinating to read through this. I want you to think about air refueling today and the things that we do in the air with fighters and bombers and transport airplanes as I read this to you. The flight of the question mark, Spaatz wrote in his report to General Fichette, demonstrates conclusively that one transport plane can safely refuel another transport in the air. He viewed air refueling as a distinct advantage in military operations. Bombers could take off with lighter loads of gas and heavier bomb loads. With refueling, a bomber's radius of action has scarcely any limit at all. Refueling could be extended to pursuit, attack, and observation planes to enlarge their areas of operation and enhance flying safety. Spaatz foresaw commercial planes accomplishing transcontinental and transoceanic flights without landing. Refueling would reduce time on long trips by eliminating fuel stops. Flying would be safer, for with refueling, planes located at frequent intervals across the country, transports could circumvent bad weather and use radio to ask for in-flight refueling. The Cincinnati Enquirer believed the flight of the question mark won the interest not only of the man in the street, but that of the world of science in an unusual degree. The New York Post even said, a new chapter in history of aviation has been accomplished. The Washington Star thought it might lead to a nonstop trip around the world. Imagine that. We might be able to circumnavigate the globe now. And all of you have heard of B-1s and B-2 bombers, B-52s doing that. The Albany Evening News said that while the flight might not have been an immediate benefit, it should further aviation to give more confidence in flying. Editors even praised the crew of the ? A man who has to listen for days to the unbroken roar of airplane motors, the Richmond News Leader asserted, is entitled to all the distinction he gets for breaking a record. So when it says pursuit, attack, and observation planes, let me just explain to you what those are. Pursuit planes, F-22. That's fighter airplanes looking for air superiority, going out and hunting other airplanes. Attack airplanes could be the A-10, could be the F-15E. Bombers, of course, we know what those are, B-1s, B-52s, B-2s. And he said observation planes. Well, that's all of our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance airplanes. Airplanes like the E-3 AWACS, the RC-135 Rivet Joint, all the versions of the RC-135, the Cobra Ball, the Combat Set, so many of these different airplanes that we refuel now, they're all covered in this report. Spots makes to Fichette going, we got to keep on this. Prior to World War II, the British get involved and they come up with the grappled line looped hose method of refueling, where you have a grappled line from one airplane, the receiver airplane, actually gets a hold of the trailing hose of the tanker, and they grab it, pull it in, plug it in, and then the tanker airplane goes up higher so that the fuel drains out of the airplane. The grappled line looped hose system is what Sir Alan Cobham starts with. They later use a gun that shoots the pawl out that grabs the line and pulls the hose in. But later on, they actually come up with the hose and drogue system that we use now. The system that John Richter came up with is pretty close to the hose and drogue system we use now, refined by Sir Alan Cobham and Flight Refueling Limited in the late 30s. Let me just add to this list of refueling airplanes. There obviously is other airplanes like the MC-130, AC-130 gunship, all the AFSOC airplanes. The tilt rotor is even refueled, okay? And I've been asked several times, hey, Mark, are there classified airplanes that you refueled? Yes, there are. I refueled the F-117 when it was still a Black World program. Now, there are tanker crews in the Air Force now that have gone to areas of the United States and have refueled other classified airplanes. All of you know the B-21 Raider is about to make its first flight, and obviously it is air refuelable. So that would be a classified airplane tanker crews will refuel. Down the road, that operation, down the road, refueling the B-21s will be just like filling up the B-2 bombers. You'll see plenty of video of it on the boom, getting gas. I will tell you that there are other classified airplanes that we cannot talk about that have also been refueled. I will give you a case in point without telling you what the asset was. When I was planning the invasion of Iraq, the classified code word for the shock and awe campaign prior to its execution was polo step. And I remember seeing that word and laughing. And a few of my guys working around me said, what's so funny? And I said, well, this polo step word here, this unclassified nickname for the air campaign over Iraq, polo step. I had seen that term before. When I was stationed in Okinawa, Japan, I had extremely classified programs that are called SAP-SAR programs, Special Access Required Programs. And one of them at that time period in the 90s was called Polo Step. And it was a inventory, shall we say, of classified type of airplanes. And the crazy thing was, if the Polo Step assets were ever to come into the Pacific, they would have to be refueled, and our KC-135s were going to do it at the 909th Air Refueling Squadron. Again, I can't divulge what these things were. The folder that I had pictures, okay? And it was just weird. It was cool and it was weird at the same time, seeing these assets in a folder. And I remember one time the guy that was in charge of that particular program actually came to Kadena, and he was a civilian guy from the DOD. I had 5 SAPSAR programs at the time, and he says, "Hey, Mark, I'm just here to answer any of your questions." One of them we had recently exercised, and then I said, "Okay, Jim, I got to talk to you about this." And I started asking questions. He was very open about what the assets were, what their purpose was, what they were going to do, all these things. I was really surprised. And I don't know why I should have been surprised. I mean, I had all the security clearance, SCI, all that kind of stuff. But it was just fascinating sitting with him and going through this folder and talking about these assets and what they're doing, what they're supposed to do, what they're designed to do, and talking to Jim about these things. It was one of the most fascinating discussions I had during my military career. Sorry, I can't tell you what these things are. I'll just tell you it's weird. and some of them not so weird, but once he explained to me the whys and the whats and so forth, it made total sense. But just opening this thing up and seeing a picture, that was the other thing. A crew that went and performed this mission, the pilot, co-pilot, and navigator were not allowed in the boom pod. And they also had to sign non-disclosure agreements, even though they weren't going to see the actual refueling. The boom operator was the only one allowed in the boom pod, day or night, didn't matter. Now, of course, when they fly the mission, the crew, that's up to them. But there were rules with refueling these assets that said specifically, the boom operator is the only person allowed in the boom pod. And I've talked to other boom operators who have refueled still classified assets who have told me they're still out there, they're still doing stuff, and yes, I'm the only one allowed in the boom pod. And I can't remember what the penalty was if you were caught back there. And of course, the crew's the only one up there, but still, there was some pretty stiff penalties for talking about this polo step situation. And I just remember preparing for the Shock and Awe campaign and seeing the plan, the 1003 Victor plan, and the classified portion of it being called polo step. And thinking back to my Kadena days going, I have seen this term before. Most of you know by now that there is a stable of F-117 aircraft that are now being used as aggressor aircraft during exercises on the Nellis Range. And the Air Force is making no bones about these airplanes flying around. There have been numerous photographers and aviation enthusiasts that have seen these F-117s flying around. If you go to my TikTok page, I actually have a video. A guy, he calls himself Stink Jet, caught one going through the Jedi transition and doing a low level, an F-117. And apparently a lot of these were garaged somewhere. I don't know how many, but now they have taken them out of storage, and there is an aggressor unit of low observable airplanes that now participate not only in these exercises, but I'm sure that there's some tests and evaluation that goes on using these F-117 aggressors. And I think most of you know too, they've resurrected another aggressor squadron, and that aggressor squadron is flying F-35s. So now there's 2 low observable aggressor squadrons flying training missions, test missions out at Nellis. Somebody sent me a video of 2 of the F-117s flying in and out. I think it was Miramar, maybe a year or 2 years ago. I can't remember when. But I mean, it was like out in the open in the early morning, and these things took off out of Miramar and probably headed back to their base, I'm sure, at Tonopah. That's where they have been before. That's where the logistics tail is for them. So who knows what other types of airplanes are flying out of Tonopah that KC-135 crews, KC-10 crews are refueling. I doubt that our foreign allies are refueling these classified assets. I really doubt that. The Australians have brought their MRTT tankers over. The Brits have brought their A330 tankers over. I just don't think our international partners have refueled some of these other assets. And all of you know that there was aviation photographers several years ago that were driving under the Nellis Range and saw an F-16 or two F-16s fighting with these bigger airplanes that were painted in different color blues. And they took their camera out and went click, 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 and found out that they were flying Su-27 flankers. The F-16s were dogfighting with Su-27 flankers. And these photographers got those things out on the web. There's one photo that one of those photographers took where it shows the F-16 belly up to the photographer and the Su-27 flanker top up to the photographer, where they're in a circle dogfight and they're both in the same frame. So, hey, Su-27s are air refuelable. And a matter of fact, the Russians copied our air refueling system so that during the Cold War, if they took over any of the German bases, all of their equipment, all of their refueling equipment, ground and air, would work on their airplanes. And from what I understand, the Russian basket is made just like our basket in the United States Air Force. And I'm sure that there are some air refueling shenanigans that probably go on with some of those kinds of receivers. Let me just close this portion of this podcast with this. During the time period that I was running those programs in Okinawa, Japan, the Polo Step program did not get executed. We never had to fly and refuel those assets during the time period that I was there. I have no doubt that those assets have been used for their design purposes somewhere in the world during the time frame I was in Okinawa and forward. No doubt in my mind. But during the time period I was there, we didn't do the Polo Step program. It's just weird having this folder and this guy from the DOD in front of me. Ask me any question you want. You know, you're the guy that runs these things, and oh, here's my number if you ever call me on a stew and need to talk, okay? And if we ever exercise any of these things, particularly this one. We never did during the time period that I was there. Man, you were hoping though. You were hoping, because I remember asking Jim, I said, wait a minute, if only the boom operator is supposed to be back there, I was on the flight, could I go back there? And he goes, don't make this difficult and complicated, okay, Sluggo? Okay, fine. Hop on a flight where we're doing this. And he just laughed. It was pretty funny. Oh, I just thought of something. A friend of mine told me the other day, who was I having this conversation with? Somebody on the phone. They said, hey, the next generation air dominance platforms are already flying. The 6th generation fighters, he told me, are probably already flying. So that means more than likely, Boeing probably has an NGAD airplane, as they call it, next generation air dominance fighter, 6th gen fighter. And you know the Lockheed Skunk Works has got to have something like that flying. I cannot imagine those airplanes not being air refuelable. It just won't happen because they can't go anywhere without tankers. Nobody kicks ass without tanker gas. But I want you to think about that. That's another situation where you have these highly classified programs right now that are probably being air refueled. And they're probably under the same strict rules the 909th was under, only the boom operator in the back. So the NGAD airplane, Next Generation Air Dominance Fighters, which I understand there's already been flights with some of these things. And I can't remember when the B-21 Raider is supposed to start flying its first flight. I can't remember when it is, but during its test program, particularly during its operational test and evaluation, the B-21 Raider and these Next Generation Air Dominance Fighters are going to be refueled by either KC-135s, KC-46s, or KC-10s. More than likely KC-46, because that's the airplane for the long run. There's still over 400 KC-135s out there. We're getting rid of some of the KC-10s. One of the KC-10 squadrons at McGuire just closed up shop because they sent all their airplanes to the boneyard. So McGuire is going to get 46s here pretty soon as part of the air mobility package at the 305th Air Mobility Wing. A couple of years ago, I went to the Airlift Tanker Association convention. And of course, one of the great things about these conventions is they have an industry floor. The aviation industry, Lockheed, Collins, Boeing, Cobham, all these different groups come in and set up and show off their stuff. And I remember years ago, and I'm talking 6, 7, 8 years ago when I was still working at Rockwell, Lockheed came to the ATA and they had a mock-up, a model of their next generation tanker. And it was a low observable tanker. It looked kind of like what they call a blended wing, kind of like the B-2, had winglets on the end of the wings, and the engines were in pods at the tail end of the airplane. And they had booms and drogues on the center line and on the wingtips. That really piqued my interest. I'm sure Boeing is looking at next generation tankers. Airbus is looking at them. And as I've said before, Airbus and Lockheed are now in partnership to get their, I think it's called LMXT or LXMT, which is a version of the A330 tanker, to compete in the next tanker competition. And of course, Boeing has the 767, but all of these companies have got to be working on an advanced, low observable tanker. Now, a lot of people have asked me, do we need a low observable tanker? And I kind of laugh and I said, look, the fighter guys can't find us now. Why should we have a low observable stealthy tanker? And I asked the question, where are you planning on sending it? Are you going to send a tanker into such an environment where it may be threatened that requires you to have that kind of technology? I don't think so, but I'm not one of those guys that makes that decision. I have a lot of tanker experience, mind you. I'm not in the boardrooms looking at low observable tankers. And personally, I just don't see the need for it because we will always be protected. The tankers are the most protected asset airborne other than like the AWACS rivet joint. And most of the time we have a dedicated combat air patrol of F-15s or F-16s, F-15Es. Now the F-15EX too, you got to put that in the mix because the Air Force is buying those. And I just don't see the reason for a low observable tanker yet. That hook has not set in my mouth yet. I've seen drawings from the different companies, Lockheed, obviously, Boeing, I'm sure, and Airbus are all looking at this. The mission and purpose of a tanker is to pass gas and not be in such high threat environments, because if the tanker gets shot down, you're in a world of hurt, particularly with the fighters now. Even though their engines are very fuel efficient, they're still burning 2,000 pounds a minute in afterburner, a lot of these things. I have no idea what the F-22 burn rate is. I can't get anybody to talk to me about that. I have no idea what the B-2 burn rate is. I'm sure I can figure it out, and I'm sure our rule of thumb of 8,000 pounds an hour is probably pretty close, except for an F-22 that's in Super Cruise, where, you know, it's in min-afterburner going supersonic. Because anytime you plug in the afterburner, man, you're sucking gas like crazy. Oh, one thing I'll tell you, too, and I think I may have mentioned this before. I helped write the white paper for the B-21 cockpit, and they were using commercial off-the-shelf equipment at Rockwell Collins, now Collins Aerospace, to fill out that flight deck. Our solution was, I think it was 5 large multifunction displays across, or one big piece of glass that was touch. All of the different things that we put in the B-21 Raider cockpit, I still remember. And I remember writing a mission statement saying, hey, the reason that we're putting these things in the cockpit is because we figure that this airplane is going to fly these missions. And I can't go into what those were because shortly after we wrote that white paper, I think within 2 months, Northrop Grumman classified it. But I remember stating, these are the roles and missions we see this airplane flying. And this is why we chose to put this equipment in the B-21 cockpit. And that included helmet-mounted cueing system or a helmet-mounted sight. All of the things that you would see in an airliner, we were going to put commercial off the shelf in the B-21. Hopefully soon, we'll see a picture of the B-21 cockpit. I remember the pages that we created, had our graphics people create, where we gave them options of 4 screens across, 5 screens across, or one big piece of glass that went all the way across. Those of you who have seen the F-15EX cockpit know what I'm talking about. That's a large format display, both front and back, and the buttons are actually touching the glass. And I will tell you, while I was at Rockwell, we figured out how to make that cockpit glass 3-dimensional. We had a really wicked smart engineer in our displays group that figured out with a very simple solution to this problem how to create a flat screen actually projects 3 dimensions. And of course, that was one of the things that we said had to go in the B-21. Having the ability to look at things 3-dimensionally when you're flying, particularly going into a target area, is pretty critical. Having the ability to get Reaper video and be able to look at that 3-dimensionally, pretty incredible. We used World of Warcraft. We played World of Warcraft as this big loop to show all of our customers this 3-dimensional flat screen. And it was a real crowd pleaser too, a real crowd pleaser. We had an Army guy come in and go, can you make this smaller? Can we put this like in our Apaches and all of our MHs that the 160th SOAR fly? We said, sure. Just think of what the future of airplanes looks like, folks, and all the technology that we have now, even in our commercial airliners. All of the things that are coming up are going to be so fascinating. Think about it, man. Lowell Smith and John Richter couldn't have imagined the things that we're doing now. They're flying around on their SPADs in September of 1918, 20 to 40 minutes of playtime, and we've got B-2 bombers that are circumnavigating the globe 44 hours in the air with, I think it was 8 refuelings. Our ability to put bombs directly on a desired mean point of impact has gotten more refined, and that circle of error probability has closed and closed and closed and closed and gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. The F-15EX, look at what it's been able to do. How many of you understand that the F-15EX got new motors? It doesn't have the Pratt & Whitney F-100s in it. It has the GE F-110s in it. I remember being on the ramp during mission employment once, and the 422nd Test Evaluation Squadron had an F-15E, and I remember I got permission to take pictures on the ramp, and the 422nd Test guy said, okay, just be careful, and I said, understand, no open hatches, no open panels. And I remember walking around this one F-15E, and I went, oh, wait a minute. This thing's got GE motors, not Pratt & Whitney motors. So they've been testing those for a long time. Engine technology is growing by leaps and bounds. More powerful engines with less fuel burn. We're going to see some really incredible things come out in the next 5 to 10 years. I remember my buddy Moose Lakaitis telling me when he was like at the Navy's Studies and Analysis Agency, they were having to write a paper that said, okay, this is what the next 5 to 10 years looks like. And I asked him, I said, how's that going? And he goes, Sluggo, who can see the next 5 to 10 years? Think about your computer, for crying out loud. New technology's coming out for new computers, every 18 months? And we're supposed to look at 5 years? Will we have a next generation air dominance aircraft that will truly fly at SR-71 speeds to get to a location quickly, fight with laser kinds of weapons like Luke's X-Wing and then fly at double Mach speed home. And wouldn't that be fabulous if it didn't have conventional engines that burn gas? I'm just thinking out loud here, folks. All of you know I'm a crazy man anyway. But look at what the next years, 5-10 years, have in store for us, where technology is coming to the forefront with the B-21 Raider and these next generation air dominance aircraft, which of course means we're looking at air mobility airplanes too. I've already talked about tankers being low observable. On the drawing boards, there has to be replacements for the C-17, C-5, C-130s, all these different airplanes to not only strategically move our cargo, butter, beans, bullets, but to tactically do it too. And who knows what those airplanes will look like, what kind of engines they'll have, what kind of capabilities they'll have. How will they know what's around them? Will they be able to have this great picture of what's happening around them? The RC-135 has been around forever. The rivet joint, the combat scent, and the Cobra ball. What kind of technology are we looking at to be able to exactly pinpoint, with not within 3 meters, but maybe within 3 inches of where our enemies are? And then to be able to put weapons, warheads on foreheads in less than 5 minutes? Those are just some of the things to think of. And again, I'm thinking out loud here as a crazy man, but that's the way my brain works. We really have a lot of cool things to look forward to in the coming years where aviation is concerned, and I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be great. Folks, thanks for listening to this episode, the 64th episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit podcast. I've been your host, Mark Hasara, and we talked about the centennial celebration and anniversary of the very first air refueling in DH-4 DeHavilland Arco biplanes, and then talked about low observable tankers. Kind of ran a gamut here. This episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show is sponsored by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. There are 129 ready-to-print 4, 6, and 8-foot profiles, very detailed profiles of World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, modern fighters on our website at wallpilot.com. We do custom aviation art too. I'm doing about 6 different custom now. Helicopters, 2 of them. For all of you people who like Stearmans, I've had a lot of requests for Stearmans and actually found a really good baseline drawing for that. And T6 Texan, which is the trainer that they used during World War II. So those will be out soon. Go by wallpilot.com to look at the ready to print. They're printed on vinyl so you can peel them off and stick them to your wall, any flat surface. And they're weatherproof, we found out. Like I said, we've done unit badges for folks and they are still on boats and cars. This and previous episodes of the Lessons from the Cockpit podcast can be found on my website at markhasara.com under the podcast pull-down box. Thanks for listening, folks. Thanks for downloading this episode and previous episodes. We're up over 17,000. I think we're approaching 18,000 downloads now, which isn't too bad, I guess, for 64 episodes. I really appreciate all of you that have contacted me and asked me to do episodes on survival and what survival school is like. Somebody asked me about that. I have an SR-71 pilot I just met, retired as a Major General. I have a flight nurse that I really want to talk to. And of course, many others. Thanks again, folks. I appreciate you tuning in, downloading these episodes. We'll talk to you next week on the Lessons from the Cockpit podcast.